What's up guys? So in this video I'm gonna show you how you can mix and master your own songs. So a quick disclaimer, I'm no mixing or mastering engineer. This is just how I mix and master my own songs. Ready? Let's go. Okay, so this is the song that we're gonna mix and master. Like a really soft, fluffy, 90s inspired UK garage thing. How I tend to do my mixing is that I actually route individual elements into buses. So as you can see here in the mixer track, I have a drum bus, I have an instrument bus, I have a low end bus, I have a vocal bus, and lastly I have an FX bus. So as you might guess, the drum bus is for all my drums, but not the kick drum. Then for the instruments, I have all of my melodic components, piano, chords, synth stabs, and so on. Then I have the low end bus, and this is for the bass line, also if I use a sub bass, and a kick drum. And the reason why I like to mix the kick drum and the bass line in a low end bus is that I have a little bit more control in terms of compression and doing some EQ and stuff. I'll get onto that later. Then I have a vocal bus for my vocals and vocal chops. And then lastly, I have an FX bus, and this is just to control all of the effects like rises and sweeps. So this track is already mixed, so I'm just gonna go through everything so you can get the idea of what I do and what I tend to use in terms of plugins and tools. So if we go to the drum bus, I have some filtering. This is mainly for automation. Then I have a reverser plugin just for some automation as well. But then I have a transient shaper just to add a little bit more of transient to the drums. So it's just really subtle. Next, I have a soft clipper, and this is just to clip away any like transients that are maybe a little bit too dominant in the mix. And I believe this one actually doesn't do that much. It's just to control it a little bit. Then I have one of the most important components, and it is some bus compression. So basically to glue together the sounds. So it's making the drums a little bit louder, but they are also feeling a little bit more like joined together. And as you can see on the compressor needle, I'm not having so much of gain reduction because I don't want it to go too crazy. Then I have a passive EQ, and this is molded after a hardware unit, and I just think it sounds really beautiful. And when I'm doing like boosts to the low end and to the high end, this sounds really, really awesome in my opinion. So for the drums, I have actually boosted the high end with a high shelf, the 12K area, just to give it a little bit of like higher present in the higher end of the frequency range. Like as you might notice, I'm not doing stuff that is really doing something crazy to the sound, because it's all about adding small details here and there, in my opinion, to add up in the total picture. So this is basically just doing a little bit also a boost at the 6K area where the hi-hats are. Then the next thing is I like to use an imager plugin. This one is from Ozone, and this is basically to control like how wide certain sounds are. So if you take a listen. It's also a matter of making sure that it sounds great in mono. And I have actually split up the frequency band here. So I'm actually making the higher end of the frequency range a little bit more spread out, as you can see here. So it's this area up here. Then I have neutron free, just to remove some of the low end. There is no like rule of thumb, but around like 200 Hertz, it depends on what kind of drums that you're using. But I know like this track is really bass heavy, so I really want to make room for my kick and my bass. So that's why I have removed a lot of the drums here. And then dipping away a little bit of that 400 Hertz area. And then lastly, I have a fruity limiter, and this is actually acting as a sidechain tool. So I have the kick drum as the input trigger of the sidechaining, because when I'm doing like these two-step kind of beats with my kick drum, then there can be some of the percussion elements or the drum elements that can add like their transient on top of the kick drum's transient, and then for sure like adds up in volume. So I want to duck those drum elements when the kick are playing. So this is basically what's happening here with this fruity limiter. That's the drums. And as you can see with my drums on like all of the other effects here, I'm actually not adding anything on them, because I just tend to use samples, one-shots and loops that are really good, put them into the drum bus, group them together, and then actually just play around with the leveling. And then I can do like all of like the compression and the EQing and the saturation and so on the drum bus, because in my opinion the drum sounds more like together in like kind of a way. So yeah, that's my approach for the drums. Okay, so moving on to the instrument bus. This sounds like this. So it's just all of like that melodic sauce added to the track. The first plugin on the bus is just a tape stop effect, and this is just for automation's sake. And the next one is, again, the solid bus compressor. This one is adding a little bit more gain reduction. Then the next one, I use the passive EQ again. Like almost all of the times when I'm doing tracks, I actually use a solid bus compressor and this passive EQ on my buses, because they just sound amazing on all of the elements. Here I'm doing a high pass at around 120 Hertz, just to remove like the low end of these sounds, because for sure I have a bass line and a kick drum that's going to occupy that area of the frequency range. Then I'm also doing a high shelf boost at 12K, and then I'm going to do a boost at 3K area. What have I else done with this? Actually not that much more. So again, like this passive EQ thing is mainly because of the tone that it gives the sounds. Then I have a neutron free again, also doing like a high pass cut here to remove even more low end. So as you can see here in this area. And also doing the dip at 400 Hertz again, just to make sure that there is not that much of muddiness into the sound. So that's actually it for this bus. Then I'm gonna move on to the low end bus.
Okay, so I just want to let you know that my web shop is booming with creative and inspirational sounds that you can go check out. There is everything your sample library needs: house organs, groovy drum loops, cool field recordings, you name it. Discover all of the sample packs via the link in the description down below. That's it. Now let's get back into the video.
So for the low end bus, I actually only have one plugin, and that's neutron free. Sounds like this. So basically what I'm doing is that I'm actually just boosting the low end of both the bass line and the kick drum, because I thought it lacked a little bit of low end. And as you can see, I actually have a lot of bass sounds playing into this bus, like 3 basses and a kick drum. So for me, the most important thing is, for the bass lines, I'm actually doing a little bit of individual EQing, removing, like this one is not playing at low end, so I have like a sub bass that's playing, of course, the sub, and then I have like 2 other bass layers that are like playing more like the mid range and upwards. But here it's all a matter of adjusting the volume level, have it to play nicely together with the kick drum. So for the kick drum, I tend to have my kick, like I start with my kick when I'm mixing. And then I try to mix in the bass line, because for me, at least in my tracks, the bass line and the kick drum are the most important elements in terms of groove. So I want those to sit and fit together nicely. And that's the reason why I'm also using the low end bus, because then I can better control how they are sounding together. Like I can add some processing on the low end bus, so it's gonna affect both of the bass line and the kick drum. So right now I think like this sounds really great. So for the sub bass, I'm using like a more long sustained note, and then the kick drum is the one that's adding like that smack and transient. Also using, for the kick drum, you can see here, it's being routed to all of the bass lines here, and that's because these limiters that are here are also acting as sidechain tools. Yeah. So really solid. Then we have some vocal chops and vocal bits. And for this part, like, I have done like a ton of creative processing on the vocal chops. Then I have a vocal bus, but here I'm actually only adding a little bit of EQ processing. So again, I'm moving like a lot of the low end because, again, with the bass and the kick drum to make room for stuff. Then I'm also doing like a dip here because there were like a resonant tone in the vocal chops that interfered a little bit too much with the other elements. So I'm just using like a dynamic EQ, so it's actually just reducing every time like that certain area of the frequency are being played. And I'm also reducing a little bit like above here, and then I'm boosting the higher end of the vocal chops just to make it. And then again, I have like a fruity filter, but it's also just for automation purposes. So, and the last one is pretty quickly, because this is just for all of my effects. Usually it's only like an EQ I use here, because I want to just remove all of the low end of all of my like rises and sweeps, because I don't want them to interfere with my kick and my bass line. This is like in 99% of all of my tracks, this is what's on the FX bus. So now I have actually covered like how I will process all of the different buses. But what I then will do is I will actually take all of the buses, and then I will do my like volume adjusting on the bus level. So not so much on the individual. I actually do this when I'm producing on the fly, but now I can actually reduce, like if the drums are a little bit too loud, I can reduce all of the drums, and maybe like the instrument bus should need like a little bit more boost in volume. And also with like if the kick and the bass are a little bit too much, then I can reduce that. So, and I'm listening by ear. Like there is no like rule of thumb that I just follow every time. I actually listen to like how each element are playing together. But the most important thing to take from this is that look at each element, find some of the elements that are the most important ones, make them fit together with the other important ones, and then you slowly mix in all of the other elements of the track, because then you make sure like that the fundamentals of the track and the mix sound good, and then you can like add in all of the rest. At least that's my approach to it. So we're going to go to the mastering of this track, but we're going to go into a separate project for the mastering. Sometimes I do this in a separate project, but also sometimes I'm doing it in the actual production session. It depends on like how much my computer can handle, because those mastering plugins are pretty heavy on the CPU. But this one, I had to do it in a separate session. So this is the WAV file that I bounced out to audio. What I tend to do when I'm bouncing out the audio is that I want to have like at least -3 dB of headroom. So this is the file. So the first plugin is this Baxter EQ. It's actually a free plugin, and this is pretty great at doing like these high shelf and low shelf boosts. I actually didn't do anything with it. I think it just sounds great like not doing anything, and some of these plugin emulation actually add a little bit of character without you having turned the knobs. This just works. Then I'm using Waves plugin. It's a tape machine emulation, and this is just to add a little bit of like grit and a little bit of saturation. And I'm actually just using a built-in preset. It's called Mastering Fat, Tight and Open Stereo. And what it does is, to me, it just opens up the high end of the track. So it really makes it sound really nice in the high end, in my opinion. Then I use Ozone for mastering. And this is a really good tool for mastering. So the first thing is that I added like a little bit of boost in the low end, because it could use a little bit oomph in the low end. Yes, and then some dynamic EQing just to locate some resonant frequencies that just needed a little bit of adjustment. This is just something you have to do by ear. Sometimes you can actually just have like a band here and you can solo it and try to listen. If there is anything that sounds a little bit like off, or maybe like too prominent, dominant in the mix, just try to reduce it a little bit. So this is just a matter of listening. This is not the exact settings when I'm doing mastering. Sometimes I actually don't use this component at all. So it's a matter of like each track. Does it need to be like treated that way? Next, I go to the imager, and this is basically for controlling that everything sounds great in mono. So I'm actually from 150 Hertz, I'm making everything completely mono. So here. And this is actually it I do for this project. Sometimes I boost the high ends a little bit so they get a little bit more stereo feel to it. Then I have a maximizer, and I want to go into another plugin before I touch on this. I have a plugin here that's looking at the loudness of the track. I'm aiming for -8 LOFS. I saw a guy on YouTube talk about this, and this is generally like a good level in terms of if you want it to be played on Spotify or other streaming services, because they're also like trying to normalize the audio file. I don't know that much about it, but I just listened to his advice, and for me personally, I think this is a great like LFS to go for. So for the maximizer, I'm just using the IRC, and then I'm just reducing the threshold until like I hit the -8 LOFTS. So if we have a listen. So we are missing a little bit before we reach the -8, and that's why I actually sometimes tend to add another limiter. So I use the FabFilter Pro L, and I'm also adding a little bit of gain here. So So we are going like around that -8, sometimes -7, so maybe we should reduce this a little bit. Lastly, I just have a visualizer just to see if there's anything that I applied in the mastering stage that might look a little bit off that I couldn't capture on ear. But to me, this looks okay. So I think like this track is good to go. Okay guys, that's it for this video. I really hope that you can use my mixing and mastering tips to use on your own songs. This topic is really difficult because people has a lot of different opinions in terms of mixing and mastering. For me, I have tried to achieve a great mix and a great master for around 10 years of producing. It's really difficult, but what I have learned over the last 10 years is that you should stick to what sounds good to you. Find some of the general rules out there from really acknowledged mixing and mastering engineers and try to apply it to your own process. So for me, this is like the most important thing to achieve a great mix and a great master. And if you have like other mixing and mastering tips that you want to share, please drop them down in the comment section below. It will be so awesome that we can share some of the tips and tricks that we have with each other. If you like this video, it will mean so much to me if you will smash the like button or even subscribe to the channel. If you're looking for some sound inspiration, I have sample packs and preset packs on my web shop, and you can go check them out. The link is in the description down below. So I hope to see you in the next video. Take care. Peace.